Bodgies and Widgies, and welcome back to the channel. Today will be the first ever saltwater related care guide that we'll be doing, and I thought what better way to start it off than the very coral that almost convinced me to set up a saltwater aquarium, and that is none other than the humble Elegance coral. Before we get into this video though, as always, let's acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and the people that are managing our land, but this video will consist of basically everything that you need to know in order to keep a happy, healthy, thriving Elegance in your saltwater aquarium. So I say, without further ado, let's have a look at this amazing coral. Elegance corals are truly one of the best corals that you can add into any saltwater aquarium. They have striking colours, captivating movement, and are surprisingly easy to care for. And because of these reasons, they are certainly a popular addition for reef tanks all around the world, but they just don't seem to receive the spotlight they deserve when it compares to other corals like Scalenia or torches. These Elegance corals are found all throughout the Pacific Ocean, but they're mostly collected from the reefs in Australia because Australia is the best for the saltwater aquarium hobby. I'm still yet to see an aquacultured Elegance in person, but they certainly are available and I've seen them for sale online, not only in Australia but around the world as well. And in my opinion, I think that these Elegance corals are the closest thing that you'll get to an anemone in the aquarium, since they have the long tentacles and that fleshy body, but the benefit is that these Elegance corals are a large polyp stony coral, meaning they have the solid skeleton base, and they don't have the homicidal tendencies where they move around the aquarium, sting everything, and then just commit suicide in a wave maker and nuke your entire aquarium. But I love these Elegance corals so much that I designed the aquascape of my 40cm cube totally around my Elegance coral, which is also the highlight coral in this aquarium. Elegance corals come in a wide assortment of colours, with the general base being a range between a blue to a vibrant green. My Elegance is fairly basic, I still love it, but it's still kind of basic, with an iridescent green base colour and purple tips on the tentacles. However, there are some really awesome specimens with gold tips, purple stripes, and even some really random ones with like a dark purple base colour. In terms of their physical structure, everything about an Elegance coral is just really weird. They're a super fleshy coral, and the amount they expand is literally insane compared to the size of their stony skeleton base. And the weirdest thing is they can fully retract into this base when they're stressed out. The way that Elegance corals grow is also kind of abnormal. They seem to develop more mouths as their fleshy body grows in size. And what I've observed with my Elegance especially is the skeleton base has only grown ever so slightly in the past year, but it for sure has developed like an extra 2 mouths. It's a pig. It's a water coral pig. That's what I'm going to call it. But like most corals, the Elegance coral doesn't really have a maximum size that it can grow to. This all just depends on the water parameters and the environment that this coral is growing in. I've seen Elegance corals in person that are apparently 40 years old when they've been collected from the wild, and they're like the size of dinner plates, if not bigger. The thing is though, in the normal sort of aquarium standards, if you're starting off with a small Elegance, unless you plan on having your tank for multiple decades, they're just not going to reach that big without all of these proper conditions and the time that it really takes for them to reach this size. Elegance, in my opinion, are a fairly hardy coral. I think they're a great transitioning beginner coral, meaning that if you are able to keep some soft corals successfully and then move into like a designer zoanthid frag, you can grow that out a little bit. This will be one of the best corals to add next for you to grow in your saltwater aquarium hobby. And the aquarium size is really dependent on the size of the Elegance coral. I started off my Elegance in a 30cm cube, and given the size this coral is at now compared to a year ago, it probably would have been the only coral that I could keep in that aquarium. It now lives somewhat peacefully in my 40cm cube tank, but I feel like a 4-foot aquarium or larger could support an Elegance coral for years or during your entire lifespan that you keep a saltwater tank. And rather than the aquarium itself, the parameters and the environmental needs are easily more important than the tank size. Now, the flow and placement is a fairly important consideration for Elegance coral because of their fat, fleshy body. I find that they do best in a medium flow setting where there's enough water movement that keeps the coral's tentacles constantly moving. In my tank, the flow is provided by my Seachem Tidal 75, and you'll see how the water basically rolls like waves across the surface, crashes on the left-hand side panel and comes all the way down to provide this circular flow under the coral polyps itself. And the reason this is important is, though elegance corals can be kept in lower flow intensities, I found that detritus can actually start collecting under the actual fleshy polyps, and this obviously will just lead to a wide range of water parameter issues which you just don't want to be dealing with. And for a flow too high, I feel like it causes the fleshy body to fold up and over itself. It doesn't look all that aesthetically pleasing for that large size that the elegance coral is, so it'll just cause some damage for the coral, and you can physically see that it's kind of struggling to keep that open look that it has. I also feel like elegance coral aren't all that fussed on the surface they're placed on. I've had my elegance both on the sand and rock, and it's thrived in both locations. Lighting wise, they can really adapt to a wide range of lighting requirements, but for the entirety of the time that I've kept mine, it's basically been a medium to slightly higher range of light. I think that this really just brings out the iridescent colours that the elegance has. Temperature wise, they're going to thrive in a range of temperatures between 23 to 28 degrees. Now, I'm pretty sure we mentioned earlier that the elegance coral is an LPS, or a large polyp stony coral, and this means that it does have that solid calcium carbonate skeleton base, and it does require stable levels of calcium and alkalinity, which it's going to use to support the growth of its skeleton. It's recommended to keep the pH at 8.0 to 8.30, the alkalinity at 9 to 12 DKH, mine personally sits at 10, and the calcium at 350 to 450 parts per million. The key takeaway from here is just the range of parameters the elegance coral can tolerate, which just showcases how much of a hardy coral it is. I also always like to keep a lower nitrate and phosphate level in the tank, and this is simply just to avoid nuisance algae growth and keep down these parameters which can be potentially toxic to fish or corals. Feeding. To feed elegance or not to feed elegance? That is the question. Well, elegance, in my opinion, don't need to be fed directly, because they can purely sustain themselves on photosynthesis. With adequate lighting, the zooxanthellae are able to create the energy that the elegance coral needs. However, I do think that dosing trace elements really does make a difference. With these trace elements, the zooxanthellae can really thrive, and though this isn't really directly feeding the coral technically, these elements really improve the colours and the fleshiness of the coral, and I can see a clear difference before and after I began dosing. Elegance corals, however, are an absolute blast to feed, and if you don't feed your elegance, you're a bit of a weird person in my opinion. I feed my elegance intentionally with some pellets, the same pellets that I feed to my fish, through an acrylic tube so the food goes directly through to the coral. I don't do this as often as I used to just because I have a little bit more fish in the tank, but they have a really cool feeding response where they catch the food with their tentacles, curl it up towards their mouth, and kind of like scoff themselves like water pig corals like I mentioned before. The elegance coral, however, does usually get a pellet or two whenever I broadcast feed the aquarium for my fish, so again, you don't have to, but it is really fun, and you're a weirdo if you don't. Now, over the past 12 months of keeping my elegance and the experience that I've gained, they really do need their own space in the aquarium because they're going to end up stinging surrounding corals. I actually underestimated just how large they can puff up, and though they don't send out any specific sweeper tentacles, the size they grow to ended up me losing a Duncan coral frag because of this. But also with elegance corals, they can hold their own against other stinging corals which are potentially trying to encroach on their space. I have a hammer coral that occasionally sends a sweeper tentacle down nearby the elegance, but the elegance always wins that war. The hammer just retreats and it's like, nah, I don't want to deal with this, I'm done for the day. And then it does it like once a week again. It's just a really weird thing. But you can also keep other elegance next to each other, and this is something I want to actually do when I upgrade this aquarium in the future. Keep a little elegance garden going on, and I think it's something that you don't see all that often, but it's going to be really cool if you can pull it off. Fish-wise, I actually haven't had any issues with my elegance coral stinging any of my fish. I know that sometimes online they sort of get this reputation that because they're so stingy, they can sting fish to death, but I have a lawnmower blenny that swims through the elegance at times, clownfish that spend a lot of their time near the elegance coral, and a pretty slow yellow assessor that is also fine with this coral in a fairly small space. So I don't think that an elegance coral has the capability to kill a healthy fish in a reef tank, but more so finish off a sick or potentially dying fish. And also, they will be able to catch an already dead fish if the flow pushes it near the elegance, and that way the elegance will hold on to it. I think most of the time when people find an elegance coral with a half-digested fish in its mouth, it's usually because of one of these reasons. Now that we've seen everything you need to know in terms of care, how and where do you go about buying elegance corals? Well, these corals are basically available at almost every saltwater aquarium store, and honestly, I don't think I've been to a single dedicated reef aquarium store that didn't have an elegance coral. However, since a large portion of these are wild harvested, it isn't the easiest task to find a small one if you have a nano aquarium, because a lot of them are probably around palm or hand size and bigger. The price range, however, does vary depending on the colours, the patterning and the size. My elegance coral was purchased online from livefish.com.au for $25, which was an amazing price. I've actually made a video on this of the exact day that I purchased my elegance coral and how it came into my aquarium, and it's a really cool thing that I'm glad I have documented. But a healthy elegance coral should be nice and puffy with bright colours. But after you've purchased your elegance and you go to add it into the aquarium, firstly, a massive congratulations on buying a great coral, but make sure you take it through a slow acclimation because they are particularly sensitive to swings in the calcium and alkalinity, meaning that if your store had a different parameter to your aquarium, this will really upset your elegance coral and it's going to be a bit of a risk when you first add it into the aquarium. Along with this, I would definitely recommend to have a lower flow and light until they fully acclimatize to the tank settings. Maybe take about 2 to 3 days for this process and then begin to ramp up the flow and lighting slowly. The final thing I'm going to suggest will be that with these corals and basically any LPS, make sure you have stable water. I know that this is really stressed out with so many saltwater aquarium hobbyists, but it really does make a difference. Because a coral as amazing like this is just going to be a really tempting impulse purchase. And I have heard of and seen first-hand accounts of Elegance polyp bailout, where the coral basically detaches from its skeleton. In this situation, it's incredibly difficult to nurse it back to health, but if you have stable water, basic experience with some soft corals, and then maybe some experience with some higher end softies, this is going to be a really fantastic entry level LPS, and I would highly recommend it, because again, I'm very, very passionate about the elegance coral, and I love it to death. Alrighty, Bodgies and Widgies, I really hope you enjoyed that Elegance Coral Care Guide. For those of you that are currently keeping an Elegance, I really hope that it gave you a lot more tips to make your Elegance Coral go ahead and thrive in your tank. And if you don't have an Elegance Coral, what on earth are you doing? Go ahead and get one for your saltwater reef tank, because they are one of the best corals that you will ever add into your aquarium. But that's essentially it for this video. If you enjoy this care guide and you want to see a lot more care guides, not only for my freshwater tanks, but more saltwater themed videos as well, feel free to give this video a big thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. I don't push this all that often, but we are really growing on this channel and I'd love to maintain that growth that you guys are giving me. So that's essentially it from me. As always, stay happy, stay safe, stay Aussie Australian. Bodgie out!